Alrighty, good morning everyone and welcome to another Security Compass webinar. Today's webinar topic is integrating security in your DevOps processes. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Raquel Rodriguez, the events manager here at Security Compass and your host for today's webinar. Before we get started with the actual content, I'd like to give you a quick overview of Security Compass. For those of you who may not be aware of us until today, Security Compass was founded in 2004 and began with a team of experienced penetration testers. Today, we have come far and work with many large enterprises globally to manage their cybersecurity risk through balanced development automation. We have three key offerings. Our flagship product, SD Elements, enables organizations to deliver software quickly and reduce costs through automation. Our modular role-based e-learning solutions empower organizations to embrace DevSecOps. And our strategic advisory services offer expertise in cloud security, pen testing, and red teaming for a better security posture. Let's quickly go through some housekeeping items. As you might notice, you have all entered the session on mute to reduce background noise. Second, a recording of this webinar will be available after today's event, and you will receive an email with a link to this recording. We will also be publishing this recording in the resources section of our website. Also, we encourage everyone to raise questions. Please submit your questions into the Q&A chat, and we'll address them during the Q&A session. If after our session you would like to follow up with us or have a topic you'd like to see covered in a future session, please email us at contact@securitycompass.com. Like I mentioned for today's webinar, we're going to focus on integrating security in your DevOps processes. I'm pleased to have here today with me Altaz Villani, Director of Insights Research at Security Compass, and unfortunately, Ihan Tech, the VP of Information Security at Cyber Electra, unfortunately cannot make it today, but no worries, Altaz will take it from here. Altaz, thank you so much for being here with us today. I know our audience is keen to hear your presentation, so I'll let you take it from here.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Raquel. Appreciate that. And folks, again, this will be a highly interactive session. So please don't hesitate. If you've got any questions, any thoughts, please feel free to put it in the chat window and we'll be more than happy to address them as we go along. So kicking this right off, when we talk about DevOps, usually when we're discussing DevOps, it's not uncommon to see this infinity diagram that you have in front of you. And it usually starts by looking at things from the planning side, and then from there we move on and look at how we can code. From the coding side, we move on to the build, where we've got a build process and trying to look at continuous delivery models, finally moving on to testing, and then we get to release, and then we have this kind of symbol that goes back and feeds into the dev loop once again. So within this context, many times the focus has been on how do we do this efficiently? How do we break down silos? How do we operate and move as quickly as possible? These are all positive benefits of DevOps. What we're here to talk about today is what does this now mean when we look at DevOps from the perspective of security as well? And it looks like we've got Ihan who just joined us as well. Hello, Ihan, welcome.
Hello, Altaz. Sorry about the, just the time.
Not a problem at all. So we're just getting started. So when we take a look at this whole DevOps life cycle that we see in front of us, what we're going to do today is we'll walk through how you can inject security in each of these phases of the life cycle. And then what we'll do is take it one step further and talk about the metrics that we should be tracking. And finally, what we'll do is broaden this a little bit so that we're not focused on just software development from a custom software development perspective, but also looking at how this applies to off-the-shelf solutions. That's a question that we often get as well. What's the sort of the integration of DevOps and sort of off-the-shelf solutions as well? So Ihan, since you've joined us here, what I'll do is I'll just kick it off and talk initially about the planning side of things. Normally, once we've got our requirements, we usually have to conduct some kind of a design. And when we take a look at the design, this oftentimes includes elements of planning. What are the systems we need to use? What are the architectural constraints we've got? And I just want to kind of talk a little bit about this. Usually people, when they're dealing with design from a security perspective, they'll take a look at threat modeling. So perhaps they're using a very common tool out there is Microsoft Threat Modeler as a tool. And there are other threat modeling tools that are available, lightweight threat modeling tools as well. Can you talk a little bit about, just from the design standpoint, from a threat modeling perspective, why do we need to inject this activity from a security perspective in the DevOps lifecycle?
Absolutely. And Altaz, we know that the prevention is better than cure, right? I mean, the best and the cheapest way of kind of just solving a problem is not creating that problem at all, right? And threat modeling is kind of just to the providing us, just to this capability, right? And it allows us to kind of just sort of not to create problems so that are difficult to identify and also expensive to fix later in the SDLC.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to kind of that's why conduct a threat modeling to identify the potential attackers and threats. And also kind of just sort of use the attack intelligence and feed this one into the DevSecOps pipeline, right? And if you look at the kind of just the reactive security practices, such as kind of just sort of scanning the code with the static application security testing tools, or with the dynamic application security testing tools, they are not able to find the design and architecture related issues. That is why the threat modeling is extremely important, and it's a very kind of just sort of proactive approach that needs to be integrated into the SDLC and the DevSecOps pipeline as well.
Great. That's yeah, that's exactly what I'm seeing as well. It's a way to kind of look ahead and make sure that we are addressing these issues early on in the design stages, so we don't end up building something which then becomes either prohibitively expensive to fix, or we end up creating something that is not non-conformant to a given architecture, for example. And usually when we look at it from a security standpoint, this is not something that the DevOps teams have to do on their own. There are usually in organizations, there's an architecture team. The architecture team is responsible for also taking a look at it from a security perspective. There may be a specific security architect who will take a look at this, done in conjunction with the security organization as well. So let's move on, and then let's take a look at the coding side. Now, usually when we look at the coding side, we end up looking at like issue trackers. We end up looking at when the code is created, we'll usually find things like static analysis tools as an example. And the idea behind the static analysis tools is to catch errors that may have crept in, security errors that may have crept in, which may in fact make our code vulnerable when it goes into deployment. So can you talk a little bit about static analysis? And we've got tools out there, checkmarks, Fortify, so on and so forth, but what are the real security benefits of conducting code level testing? Why would we want to do something like this?
Right. And these static application security testing tools are a very important part of the kind of just sort of security testing, right? But the thing is, we need to kind of just sort of make a distinction here. Some of the organizations are using merely these kind of just sort of tools and saying that, hey, we are kind of just sort of implementing the security into the DevSecOps or the DevOps pipeline, right? Which is a kind of sort of false security. Let's have a look why we are kind of using these tools first, and which tools needs to be used when, right? This is extremely important. And if you are trying to kind of just bring to the proactive security approach, one of the kind of just sort of tools that we use as a developer is the kind of just sort of security spell checkers, right? These tools are kind of can be integrated into the integrated development environments such as Eclipse or Visual Studio, right? And what they do is while you are writing a piece of code as a developer, right, it kind of just checks whether you are injecting any kind of just vulnerabilities, like a kind of just a SQL injection or the cross-site scripting, etc., right? And it tells hey, this is the line number that you're introducing this issue. And by the way, this is how you can kind of just rectify the issue as well. This is extremely important because as a developer, you did not kind of sort of send this code into the code repository or to the build process, right? You are with your IDE and you are working on it. And it is telling you to kind of just sort of like a kind of just sort of buddy sitting beside you, hey, you are making this mistake, and kind of just sort of fix that one, right? This is kind of just sort of very helpful. And however, once you do this, and we know that the kind of just we have more than one developer, most probably working on an application, and each developer, if can kind of just sort of make the due diligence and they are not kind of just sort of checking the vulnerable code into the code repository, then once we kind of just sort of run the static application security testing, as you mentioned, that the check marks or 45 or, app scan, Veracode, right? And normally we shouldn't be finding any issues. And the kind of sort of scan should be kind of just sort of much more faster as well, right? However, in the real life, mistakes happen, and also these kind of just sort of security spell checkers are not the kind of just sort of full-fledged SaaS tools, static application security tools. So it is very possible that they may kind of just sort of miss some of the defects over there, right? Because they are very lightweight. So as part of the CI/CD pipeline, we run the static application security tools to kind of sort of catch the code level issues as well, right?
Great.
The problem is, Altaz, unfortunately, we are not, although we are kind of just sort of teaching the development teams how to code in different programming languages, we are not kind of just sort of teaching them how they can kind of just sort of embed the security into the code that they are building, right? So think about these tools, SaaS tools, as a kind of just just sort of helper to the development teams to prevent, code level kind of just sort of vulnerabilities over there.
Yeah.
And speaking of the code, as a developer, we are kind of just sort of using the open source software as well, right? This is not only the kind of the software that we write, but we are kind of just sort of leveraging the software that the other individuals or organizations did write as an open source. And we use these in our code base as well. So similarly, we call this one the security composition analysis tools, SCAs, that needs to be kind of just run so that we can identify whether there are existing vulnerabilities in the open source software that we are using, right? And if there are, I think the tools kind of just providing some advice on which kind of just version of that open source software is not vulnerable, and it's kind of recommending to use those, right?
Yeah. That's a really big part of the supply chain issue these days, is when we take a look at open source, how do we ensure that we haven't introduced code level vulnerabilities? I see that Ruth, you've got your hand up. I'm not sure if you've got access to your mic or if you want to put something in chat. If there's something that you want to put out as a comment, certainly we're willing to do that as well. Okay, we'll move on. So when looking at the build process then, Ayhan, now we've got the code, so we've done threat modeling. Are we now moving forward, looking at the build process itself? The question is now, from that standpoint, what do we do? We've got, tools like Jenkins that can help us with our CI and CD. And so the question that emerges at this point is, what's the benefit from a security perspective to take a look at this from a CI/CD standpoint? Is it something that we now have an opportunity to catch certain errors? What does it mean as we begin to integrate additional components now into our system?
Absolutely. As we mentioned, I kind of just separated the security into the two big sections, right? The number one is the proactive, that we kind of just discussed the threat modeling over there, right? And also that there's another kind of just piece to that, which is the risk assessment and risk management, right? That needs to be kind of just done proactively as well to kind of just reduce the number of the vulnerabilities that we are kind of just sort of catching in a reactive stage, right? Like the kind of just using the SAST and DUST, right? When we integrate these tools, automated tools, into the CI/CD pipeline, right? As you mentioned, that the kind of just automated feedback, we are kind of just leveraging to the automated feedback, and depending on the kind of just the tools that we can kind of just do, send the defects into the development teams, into the Jira, for example, once we kind of just run these tools as part of the build process, and have the development teams kind of just to rectify the issues over there, Altas.
Yeah. So we've got a situation now where, as additional components are coming in, from a risk assessment standpoint, we can validate more and more now about the system in general. And so it's being done on a continual basis. So if we look at, and I see that Ruth has put a question in Q&A, are we not leaving it too late by covering security in the requirements? So yes, we do need to have requirements up front. This is not, we don't discover security issues. That does happen, but we do need to know coming in, for example, if there are certain security requirements that must be met. That then kind of kicks off the design, the coding, the building part of the life cycle. And then as we look at the CI/CD, as it begins to converge, while we may have taken a look at security from each component of the system, now we're taking a look at the system overall, and there may be additional risks that have been introduced. And I think, so now if we move on to the next stage, which is around the testing, many times when we look at testing within the DevOps lifecycle, it's usually done in the form of some kind of a pen test now. So, we've done CI/CD, we've gone in, done our SAST and DAST scanning, we've done our threat modeling, and there are still things that are coming in. So we're layering in security as we go through every step of the life cycle. And when we look at penetration testing, Ayhan, can you talk a little bit about penetration testing and what are some of the things from a security lens perspective, why this would be important from a DevOps standpoint?
Absolutely. And before kind of just answering this question, I would like to kind of just sort of go back to the question that Ruth asked, I guess, yeah. Right? Why not to kind of just sort of why we are not starting to kind of just sort of in the requirements phase? Actually, we need to kind of just sort of start maybe earlier than that, right? And we mentioned, we did talk about the threat modeling, and the whole purpose of the threat modeling is kind of just to identify the threat and threat actors, right? And also, so while doing this one, you need to get kind of just the regulatory requirements and also the kind of just the environments, right? Whether you are using the kind of just on-prem servers and or cloud, right? And these kind of just the kind of just the many things that includes the requirements, right? And we are kind of just using the threat modeling to feed the other SDLC stakeholders. And BAs is one of them, or if they are using the kind of just the security stories as part of the agile, right? We are kind of just creating the stories as part of that, right? After the threat modeling. And also not only that, we are kind of just feeding the designers and architects and also the development teams and the QA teams with the abuse cases, right? And as I mentioned, I divide the kind of just the security activities into two. The proactive approach, like the threat modeling and just the risk management, is just kind of just allowing us to kind of just feed this information into the other stakeholders, the SDLC practitioners. Coming back to your question, Altas, how did the penetration testing kind of plays a role in the the CI/CD pipeline? Well, we need to kind of just do, unfortunately, there's not only one tool that kind of just do the fixes or identifies everything, right? That's why we need to kind of just bring to the layered security, and penetration testing is one of them. And by nature, the kind of just the automated security tools such as SAST, DUST, and SCA, may not kind of just sort of identify the deep down, just sort of design related issues over there, right? Or maybe the kind of just sort of sometimes the compliance related or, functionality related kind of just sort of issues may not be identified with those tools, unfortunately. And that's why the threat modeling is kind of just really important. And actually, it kind of just feeds the penetration testing activities as well, right?
Yeah.
And that's why we need to kind of just, conduct the penetration testing to kind of just sort of find those issues, design and architectural level issues. If we have not kind of just a practice to the threat modeling, of course, or, the other business logic related issues. That's why we need to kind of just sort of practice the penetration testing as well.
Yeah, there's a question that came in through the QA and I love it. I was hoping to get to this question eventually, but let's take it right now. How do we set up penetration testing, the approach? Do we automate it or do we just keep it manual? Wouldn't the manual approach slow down the releases? How do we improve this area to catch up with DevOps? Oh, it's a hot topic. I hear it a lot. I'll ask you first, Ayhan, to offer your thoughts, and then I'll offer my thoughts on this as well.
Yes, this is indeed very good question, right?
Yeah,
I
it
love
is.
it as well. Again, I mean, if you are kind of just applying to the security at the very end, like, hey, we didn't do anything, and let's do a kind of just penetration testing at the very end. Trust me, this is going to be very hard. You will find lots of issues, right? That's why we need to kind of just apply the layered security over there. That's why we really talk about the threat modeling, right? So that we can identify proactively the issues over there. And we are going to prevent those things so that when we do the kind of just penetration testing, which takes time, by the way, depending on how deep you want to go, right? And then we are kind of reducing that effort as well, right? We are kind of just shifting the security to the left so that when we go to the CI/CD pipeline, we are kind of just saving tons of time over there, right? This is extremely important, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, can we kind of just automate the penetration testing? Well, yes and no, right? As I mentioned, I mean, the whole purpose of the penetration testing is this kind of just sort of catch the things that your SaaS, DAST, SCA cannot catch, right? And that includes the design and architecture. But my question to you, why we are not preventing these with the kind of proactive security approaches such as threat modeling and risk assessment at the very outset, at the very front, so that we don't have to deal with this and we don't have to lose time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think other approaches that I've seen as well, in addition to shifting penetration testing concerns to the left, so we're not leaving everything to the penetration testers. Other approaches to help in terms of trying to reduce the manual overhead of penetration testing that I've seen is to use templates, which implies reusable architectural components. If something has already been penetration tested, as an example, it can reduce the time that it takes to conduct the penetration testing. Other things that I've seen as well is to consider the goal of penetration testing ultimately is to try and discover vulnerabilities, to try and fast track that by looking initially and reducing the discovery time by looking at knowledge bases that exist out there already in the industry. So as an example, there's the MITRE ATT&CK framework that's available. We've got many of these repositories, so we don't need to go back and kind of rethink everything. Where I think we still have challenges is in the context. If, for example, we've got something that we need to do penetration testing for, which is a specific type of technology, which requires domain level expertise, that I think is still there. We still need to go through it. The challenge that I see is in getting too specialized sometimes the output that comes out of penetration testing and the recommendations that get made oftentimes do not tie in to the risk that is ultimately important to the business. So when we take a look at penetration testing and reducing the time that's involved with that, I think hand in hand with that, a close cousin related to that is the value that penetration testing is ultimately going to provide. So I hope that addresses some of the concerns. We don't have a complete solution to that in the industry. What we can do is reduce the amount of time. I haven't seen a fully automated way of doing this, although I've seen mechanisms to go in and use tools from an integration standpoint. So Stix and Taxi and some of these things are available out there, but I haven't seen something that yet will go in and ultimately give you, for example, the ability to auto-generate an attack tree based on a context, right? Just by looking at the architecture as an example. We still need this human in the loop element from a penetration testing perspective. So to the questioner on this one, if you feel that this addresses your question, then that's great. If not, please do ask some additional questions, and we're happy to take those as we go along as well. So in the interest of time, just moving along then, Ayhan, and looking now at the release cycle, when we consider releasing things out into a production environment, usually we've got this closely tied with code that has now been vetted, it's been approved, and we're getting ready now at this point to release this into production. And as we look at taking this and putting this into a production environment, there are concerns about, for example, having secrets leaking into our operational environment. So usually when we look at release management, we have to make sure, not that this is something that's done in the release cycle itself, but secrets management becomes a key part of the entire DevOps lifecycle, making sure that prior to getting us into a release mode, that we are not leaking any sensitive passwords, usernames, credentials, keys, these types of things out there. And we've seen that there are many secrets management tools today that are in fact informing best practice on how we can get this out. I think one of the challenges that still remains is in the open source arena, particularly when we've got software code that has been there for maybe a decade now and people are still using it. Some of these things may still be in there. But Ayhan, can you talk a little bit about sort of, from a release standpoint, some of the challenges that we see and why it's important to think about security when we're in this release mode?
Right. If you look at the kind of just the data breaches, actually, it's kind of just surprising to see that most of the kind of just the issues are coming from the misconfigurations out there, right? Mm-hmm. And that is why it's kind of so extremely important to kind of just make the release or change management process as just as solid as possible, right? And yes, as you mentioned, there are some kind of just the tools out there from the secret management perspective that they can kind of just work. But the most important thing here is the kind of just the governance, right? It is extremely important. I mean, if you we are kind of just talking about the technology and the tools, but when we look at the kind of just the actual DevSecOps, right? The most important element is the human factor over there. Right? And also the kind of just the process, right? Technologies is the easiest piece, right? If you look at kind of just the DevOps, what it is trying to do, right? It is kind of just trying to bring the different disparate SDLC groups into a collaborative team environment, right? We all know that the collaboration, we are truly productive, teamwork is awesome and fun to work with. However, there is another side, right? The collaboration is also hard and personally challenging, right? For example, the study is showing that over 80% of the employees lack collaboration and effective communication in the workplace. That is resulting in frustration and concerns, workplace politics, and lack of understanding, you name it, right? And it's just not the full list of things that you will hear. So these crazy DevSecOps people attempted to bring these different groups and telling them to work together, laugh together, swear together while building that software, right? So, and one of the biggest mistakes that the organizations are making here that they are expecting that this magical collaboration between these different stakeholders, such as release management, change management, development teams, are taking place in a natural way. Unfortunately, it is not the case, or maybe it is just me that I've never seen it, right? And that is why it is kind of just extremely important to kind of just the work with those release management and change management people, and kind of just to test these things in a kind of just the production ready environments, right? Because if you look at the DevSecOps, mostly they are leveraging the kind of just the cloud. It's very easy to kind of just to mimic the production, and kind of just to do your testing or release management over there first to ensure that everything is just kind of just safe and sound, right? There are tons of information over there. But again, maybe we are kind of just going off topic, but this is what I observe, Altas. It's not the
Actually,
technology.
it's interesting
Yeah.
you bring this up, Ayhan. It is in fact not off topic, but I did want to circle back, and I wanted to talk about collaboration. So we have Zoom, we have Teams, we have Slack, we have all these things that we can use to help teams from a security perspective to try and make this as lightweight, to make this, fast moving, decisions get made. It doesn't imply that we don't document things. But if we need to go in and collaborate, there are tools out there that can help us to do these types of things. And I think you've touched on something. I was hoping to get to that later in the conversation, but you've brought it up now. So from a collaboration standpoint, this is really about going in there and trying to get, multiple teams working together and trying to break down the traditional silos that have existed. And there are ways to bring these teams together. Sometimes geography has been a problem. Sometimes we've got teams even in different buildings, but we've got virtual ways of being able to integrate this now so that we can help address what these problems are. And this becomes important in use cases, even when we've deployed something already and we end up finding a particular vulnerability. We may need to get a team together to come in and to rally around like a virtual war room, and in that context be able to debate and talk about what we need to do and how we need to fix it, and then we can disband, go in there and collaborate in that sense from a rapid cycle perspective to address what those issues are. So thanks for bringing this up. And I think just looking at it from a release and deployment standpoint, these are closely tied together from what you had described earlier, where we've got configuration management, being put into place now so that when we deploy this, it is something where we have teams that are aware of that infrastructure that it's going to go into. We've tested this. The developers are aware of the infrastructure that we're going to be deploying this to. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit from a deployment standpoint, Ayhan, the traditional approach that we've seen from a change management standpoint, right? When we have like a security board or some board that will go in and say, you can't deploy unless we've got all these things checked off. But in a DevOps environment, we've been checking these things off as we've been going. Has that been your experience? By the time we get to deployment and release management and all these things, we've already been doing these activities, which thereby decreases the cycle time for deployment. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. I mean, we call that one the gating process, Altas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And during the SDLC, we have different gating process. And at the end, as you mentioned, before we go to the production, right, usually we kind of just do the gating saying that, hey, are we going to go to the production with the kind of just identified issues over there, right? And as you mentioned, but the DevSecOps kind of just providing or automating this kind of just the gating process as well. It's very possible that you can automate even the kind of just the security sign-off, right? And so that they can kind of just shorten the release cycles over there. This is the whole point of the DevSecOps, kind of just go to the production with the kind of just small changes. And so that you can kind of just provide the value to the customer, right? To your point, yes, it can kind of just shorten the release cycles if you can kind of just automate this adequately.
Yeah, and it's interesting because now we've got another comment that came in. You need to have strong change management teams with solid policies. Absolutely agreed. lest anyone think that this implies that the release process is very loose and we don't have policies guiding it. That's it's not the intent. We absolutely need to have guardrails. Now, what's interesting is these guardrails get monitored as we go throughout the DevOps lifecycle. So we're always looking at any point, if anything goes beyond these guardrails, then it triggers an exception. And we need to think about whether we block this or whether we make an exception and let this go through. But it's something that is then documented. But otherwise, everything that fits within the bounds of those policies, this is where some of the automation can help. And as we're gathering data now across all these tools, we haven't even touched on that topic yet, but these tools are all kind of radiating information. And if they're all within the guardrails of what we deem to be part of the security posture and the thresholds of the organization, then we can start to shrink down the amount of time that it takes for us to conduct the release and deployment cycles as well. There was another comment that came in. DevOps and security teams belong to different management silos. What's the best method to bring them together so the security activities are being done appropriately? Huge problem. Very relevant question. Ayhan, you want to take that first, and then I'll follow up on this. How do we de-silo security, dev, and ops?
Yeah, this is very kind of just a common problem, right? Mm-hmm. So what is needed most here is the strong governance and effective leadership that will glue these loosely connected parts, like the security and the kind of the development, and also the other parts as well, operations, etc. Right? The leadership and governance will provide a sense of ownership and accountability in the DevSecOps teams. And how? But they are going to give them enough autonomy to make their own decisions while remaining within the boundaries of the organizational values. This is extremely important. Yes, you will give the DevSecOps practitioners the autonomy. However, you need to remind them that autonomy comes with the responsibility, right? It's not the freedom to take inappropriate actions or make immature decisions to make DevOps to DevOps that we usually see. Mm-hmm. So ownership and accountability happen when purpose is combined with the empowerment and the commitment. And I think, Altaz, this is only achievable when there's a strong governance and leadership in the organization, right? And when I look at the kind of just the organizations, I see two different things, right? To be honest with you, many organizations attempt to adopt the DevSecOps before they set the tone with a strong leadership support. I see that some of the organizations have strong leadership without the governance, though, and this results in DevSecOps tyranny. So what happens is, someone in the kind of DevSecOps team presses a button over there and go to the production within a minute because they are saying that, hey, we are kind of practicing the DevSecOps and get hacked within the next minute or so. On the other side, I see some of the organizations have governance without strong leadership, and this results in the bureaucracy and indifference. So what happens is you would like to go to the production, maybe you executed the due diligence over there, but due to heavy bureaucracy, you have to wait for an entity, and usually this entity is the security team, to perform an action or decide something that takes, I don't know, forever. Right? So it is extremely important to have this balanced approach in governance and leadership while adapting to the DevSecOps, right? This is what I wanted to kind of just share, because you are bringing these disparate groups over there, and that they have different kind of just the viewpoints, different workloads, and the most important thing is this kind of, so how do you get these people to work together in harmony, right? And how do the organizations do this? Depends, but if you do not do this, trust me, there'll be no DevSecOps over there.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, therein lies the difficulty. So I also want to bring out that, we've got dev and ops and security. It's important not to think that one team is better than the other, right? We're all in this together. Everybody is trying their level best to move forward and to help from the business enablement standpoint. And I found that taking that kind of an approach will now start to open up the discussion to say, look, we're all trying to do the right thing here. So security teams, you are producing policies and controls that are intended to help, to guide and provide what are the minimum maximum thresholds that we should be looking at from a development standpoint. Thank you for helping us with this. However, when you give us these controls, we sometimes find it difficult to interpret what this means, and it begins to open up that kind of a dialogue. And I found that it really is when we've got teams that are willing to begin to talk to each other. Therein lies ultimately the integration of the outputs from each of these teams. So we've got, similarly with devs, right? When devs produce a particular build, then it's important for the ops teams to express, thank you for producing this build for us. However, we need you to understand a little bit more about the infrastructure on which this is going to get deployed into, so that when you're developing these things, you keep that in mind, which is a form of creating the guardrails, but doing it in a collaborative manner. And I think these types of things, when we begin to look at it, it moves away from having to force teams to restructure themselves and begins to look at the output and the artifacts that are produced by these teams, and how do we begin to stitch together these artifacts. And eventually what ends up happening is we end up with a security fabric, which is based on the artifacts that will drive underlying a lot of what's happening in DevOps and DevSecOps. So I found that that's been another approach that teams can take to de-silo. In some cases, total, like just getting rid of silos altogether is in fact not possible. When we've got certain constraints, there may be legal constraints, there may be organizational constraints. Devs may not have access to production environments, and it's for compliance reasons or regulatory reasons. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad thing. The question is, how do we adapt in DevSecOps to meet what these particular needs are? So I hope that answered the question. If not, please ask again. We have another comment as well. How can site reliability engineers, so SRE, help improve security in the DevOps cycle? So SREs, take a look at the reliability components, looking at it from an operational standpoint, but they've got a lot to say about resiliency and how that can feed back into the development cycle itself. And it does have an impact on how developers begin to think from an SRE standpoint. Ayhan, you want to take on the SRE angle on this, and then I'll add my comments as well?
Absolutely. This is not only the SRE, right? The security is everyone's business, right? I mean, as you mentioned, I think it's just the kind of just a collaboration effort, right? And different kind of just sort of stakeholders, SDLC stakeholders, including the SREs, can kind of just take a look at the things from different angles, and they can kind of just sort of see the other stakeholders may not see. Right, and that's why they kind of just bringing these to kind of just into a just a collaborative environment, and discussing and kind of just exchanging ideas is extremely important, right? Again, it kind of just comes to the culture shift, right? Instead of kind of just leaving the security into the security teams, it is not scalable, right? And it should be everyone's business, and it should be done in a collaborative way, Altas.
Yeah, and I think the SREs, the value that they could provide is when they start to see what causes instability in the system itself, that could be really valuable information, because anything that starts to become unstable potentially creates an opportunity to go in there and take advantage of some vulnerability that may exist. So I think the SREs, as they're monitoring what is happening in the production environment, have a lot to bring this to the table to talk about this. If we take a look at security in general, we've got the security triad, right? It's the confidentiality, we've got the integrity, and we have the availability. The availability component of this is a key part. So the SREs can come in and they can provide the thresholds And I think in working together with the ops teams and the devs teams to come up with an architecture which may in fact need to evolve over time to provide additional stability and resiliency. And again, as we push this backwards and as we shift left, this now, because it impacts the code, it can impact what's happening on the threat modeling side, but it's intended to get all these teams collaborating together to provide their perspectives into how we can develop all of this in a secure manner. So I hope that addresses the question that was brought up. Once again, if not, please ask again. We may have missed the point, but hopefully that helped you out as well. Moving along then, Ihan, and we take a look at operations. So we hear a lot in operations, and usually when we look at operations, we're dealing with things like log files. We have tools like Splunk, for example. We've got AI that's being talked about, and it's closely tied with operational and sort of the monitoring aspects of this as well. But can you talk, Ihan, a bit about SecOps and the importance that SecOps plays in the broader context of DevSecOps and how it helps to improve security?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, I mean, if you look at the kind of the DevOps over there, the underlying kind of just the driver is the automation, right, Altas. And the kind of just the example that you provided as a SIEM, for example, if you are kind of just collecting the logs, application logs, etc., it is impossible for a kind of just a human being to kind of just consume all of the events that the application kind of produces, right, with the naked eyes. And that's why we need the kind of just the tools such as SIEM or maybe the kind of user entity behavior analytics to kind of just immediately kind of just find the root cause of those anomalies and kind of just feed this one into the kind of just the broader audience that includes the development teams, architects, etc. Right? Again, it is kind of coming boiling down to the kind of just the collaboration efforts between those different stakeholders, right? That the DevOps is kind of just trying to break those barriers, right? The collaboration is the key here, Altas.
Yeah, that makes sense. I see, Harish, you've got your hand up. If you've got access to a mic, you're welcome to put out your question if you'd like, or put it in the chat window if you think that we've missed something, by all means. Looks like you're muted at the moment. So we'll just keep moving forward. And Harish, please feel free to inject something into either chat or Q&A, and we'd be happy to take that up as well. So Ihan, now we've kind of taken a look at this and we've gone through the entire DevOps lifecycle with a security lens, which brings in security into DevSecOps with the intent of not slowing down DevSecOps as best as we can. And I think this is important to kind of put out there. People, may have a misinterpretation that when we try to put something like security into DevOps that we're just going to keep with the same velocity. It's the same thing as when we talk about governance. It's the same thing when we talk about collaboration. It may appear that as we go through each of these stages that we're slowing down, but ultimately at the end of the day, when we start to take a look at things like remediation, vulnerabilities caught in production, the costs of breaches, these kinds of things, it ends up becoming in fact more efficient over time. What I'd like to do now is now that we've described integrating security into DevOps and looking at a DevSecOps model, I think we should talk from a governance standpoint, Ihan, about this idea on metrics as well. So we talked about leadership, accountability, commitment. From a metric standpoint, we have, on the one hand, looking at feature releases. How many features did we release? And that may be important to a business because they want to monetize those features. On the other hand, we've got deployment frequency is another metric that's being used from a speed standpoint. But let's also consider what are some of the metrics that we can use from a security perspective, mean time to recovery or things like that. But can you talk a bit about what it means for looking at metrics across the DevSecOps lifecycle and which ones are relevant and which ones are important?
Yeah, and as the old saying goes, right? You cannot manage what you cannot measure, right?
Yeah.
That's why the security metrics are extremely important. But before we delve into the kind of just sort of security metrics, but by the way, there are tons of security metrics that you
Yeah.
can kind of just collect, right? But before we delve that one, what is needed from the governance perspective, right? You need to kind of just sort of identify which process and procedures you will need to build for your DevSecOps activities, right? You need to identify how you will govern and communicate the activities, roles, and the responsibilities. And also, which stakeholders will be part of your core DevSecOps team, and which stakeholders will support them. Maybe they talk about the SREs, right? Are you going to kind of put them into the kind of the core DevSecOps team, or are they going to be supporting those kind of just the core teams over there, right? This should be communicated and in a kind of sort of collaborative working environment, right? And also, I see some of the kind of just sort of things over there which does not make sense. Which applications will be in the scope of the DevSecOps needs to be defined, right? Some of the organizations are trying to put all the applications over there, and it is overwhelming to the kind of just sort of SDLC practitioners. And with all the good intentions, they cannot kind of just collect the very valuable metrics over there. So, and one of the other things that before collecting any metrics, that you need to define your risk appetite and risk thresholds for the applications. For example, I see lots of organizations that they are kind of sort of running this CI/CD pipeline over there, and there are some high or maybe critical vulnerabilities identified, but no one knows. Are we going to kind of just stop to the build? Are we going to kind of just go to the production? You need to define these kind of just sort of things, right? This needs to be crystal clear and documented for DevSecOps practitioners. So,
Yeah.
and then maybe you can kind of just go to the which metrics that you're going to kind of just collecting, right? In order to calculate a return of investment on your DevSecOps pipeline, you need to start collecting the metrics. These metrics will drive budgets and allow you to make the kind of just the executive team make the informed decisions as well, right? As I mentioned, the kind of just the identified issues in threat modeling. It's not only kind of just the CI/CD pipeline, but before that, those metrics are extremely valuable as well. But if we are kind of just talking about from the CI/CD pipeline perspective, then the kind of just identified defects and the remediated defects, or maybe the kind of just the time that take to kind of to remediate those defects can be very valuable to measure, right? And so that we can kind of just prove that the return of investment is kind of just the tangible from the DevSecOps activities, Altas.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's important as we consider the metrics here that they are in fact relevant to the stakeholders, right? As we're tracking this and as we start to create metrics for the purpose of seeing whether we are meeting the thresholds against the guardrails, we have to make sure that it's something that is meaningful to people. Many times, if we go to an executive and the metrics are based on, let's say, story points that have been burned, it doesn't mean much to a business person if we talk in those terms. But if we talk about in terms of, features or releases or potential revenue accrued or things like that, then I think it becomes useful. And that's a whole separate topic on how do we get the metrics together and then stitch them so that we've got an end-to-end integrated way of looking at these metrics and how they roll up into eventually a dashboard for executives and business stakeholders to make informed decisions. And that's another benefit of DevSecOps, is because we are doing this thing in a rapid sort of cycle, the information that radiates upwards should be something that's in a timely manner. And if there are any questions, then there should be that drill down capability to come down right down to the DevSecOps level and find out where potential bottlenecks might lie, which might then inform us on things like whether we have to partner with someone, whether we need to think about additional training, additional tooling, those kinds of things as it pertains to, for example, additional risk being introduced. I'd like to, in just the last couple of minutes we've got here, we want to talk a little bit about off-the-shelf software as well. So it's not just about developing custom solutions. We're kind of seeing, you know, SaaS, for example, or you know, opportunities where people want to move quickly, and there are already tools out there that do much of what they want, so they purchase that and then they configure it. But from a security perspective, there's usually a procurement team that will go through some kind of a checklist. If it's a cloud vendor, we might go through some kind of SOC analysis. But can you talk, Ayhan, about off-the-shelf solutions, and what does that mean in terms of intersecting with DevSecOps?
Right. And it's funny that you mentioned, right? Because I see lots of kind of just the shelfwares. You know what a shelfware is? It's a kind of just the software that you use, right? And you bring this one to your on-prem or SaaS, you real work for you, right? And it's kind of just this one on the shelf and it gets dusty, right? You're absolutely right. I mean, when we look at how we acquire or kind of procure those kinds of just the codes, right? And unfortunately, we are not kind of just putting the you know, the security at the very upfront over there, Altas, right? For example, if we are kind of just dealing a vendor or third party, into the contracts, we are not putting the kind of just the security clauses over there properly, right? And as such, whatever we get, sometimes it's kind of just the surprises us. And to be honest with you, since we are not dealing with the development of those kind of just commercial off-the-shelf applications or systems, we don't know their kind of just sort of security posture as well, right? Yeah. That's one thing that I can kind of just sort of strongly suggest is just kind of just sort of just to govern this one via kind of just sort of contract. B, just to ask before kind of getting any kind of just sort of off the shelf, hey, can we kind of just sort of get maybe a kind of the security posture of this application that has been done, like a penetration testing done by a kind of just sort of third-party company, or ask, because some of the kind of just sort of organizations provide you the source code as well, right, for those kind of just applications. And if it is the case, ask permission to kind of scan and kind of sort of see those issues over there as well. But from your question, you're kind of just sort of trying to tie this one to the DevOps. That is a kind of just sort of different story. Since we are not developing that one in-house, Altas, I don't see kind of just sort of very kind of integration point into the DevOps. So
yeah,
maybe I missed that.
No. And so I agree. So what happens is the whole dev cycle has essentially been outsourced to this third party. And while we have configuration elements in there, there's a part here where I think the operational team can come in and monitor. And so we've got things like SLAs, but I think there's another aspect to this where we've got a governance element to this, and it really ties in now to risk. How do we begin to go in there and manage risk if we've got, for example, our data inside a third-party solution? This doesn't preclude development altogether, because sometimes these off-the-shelf solutions are oftentimes platforms with APIs where we can now go in and we can build on top of that as well. So these are things that need to be built in terms of how this will integrate from a dev and ops perspective. I agree with you, Ayhan. Contracts and audits are what I've seen as well being used to go in there and validate this and ensure that it's being refreshed over time. And with that, what I'd like to do is bring this to a close. We've pretty much used up all of our time here. I wanted to thank everybody for attending, and I want to hand it off to you, Raquel, at this point to bring us to a land. Thank you.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much again, Altaz and Ayhan. That was a great and interactive session. Just to let everybody know, we do have webinars lined up for the next few weeks. So if you are interested in attending any of these, please go to the upcoming events and webinar section of our website. Also, if you haven't heard, we've officially launched our podcast, The Balancing Act. So please make sure to check us out on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. We hope everyone found this presentation insightful. And again, we will be providing a link to the recording to everyone here via email. Thank you for attending. Stay well and safe, and have a great day.